At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Chikondi. Let's begin. The job of a gate watcher was nothing special, but for someone born in a medieval world from across the galaxy like Lavsar, the boring position of scanning travelers who crossed the spatial gates was safe and honorable enough for his liking. It was true that standing all day in front of a dimensional fissure was far from pleasant, but Lavsar had never once scanned a forbidden visitor, and his work had always been routine at best, until today. The moment he scanned the so-called human, the words on the scanner's screen flashed in glaring red. Earth native, do not engage. Lavsar's entire body went rigid, his three-fingered hand trembling as it gripped the scanner. The device nearly slipped from his grasp, and he had to clutch it with both hands to steady himself. Across the gate's shimmering expanse, that magnificent dimensional tear contained within a massive metallic circle that towered 5 meters high, he could see Tarnir, his fellow Kibtak guard. Unlike the human standing between them with that strange, soft face capable of those bizarre muscular contractions, the Kibtak people communicated their emotions through something far more elegant, or so Lavsar had always believed. Their curved horns, which spiraled back from their foreheads, shifted through a spectrum of colors that conveyed every nuance of feeling. The transformation was immediate and involuntary, controlled by specialized chromatophore cells that responded to neurochemical changes. And right now, both Lavsar's and Tarnir's horns had turned a deep, vibrant blue, the unmistakable color of confusion, shock, and all emotions related to being utterly, completely impressed. Lavsar blinked his 4 eyes in sequence, a nervous habit he'd developed over his 3 years as a gate watcher. He stared at the display again, hoping the words might change, might reveal themselves to be some kind of system error. But no, there they remained, shining in that angry red. Earth native, do not engage. He cleared his throat, a sound like grinding stone that was common to his species. His vocal cords vibrated against the calcified plates in his throat, producing the distinctive gravelly tone. The human stood there, seemingly unbothered, wearing simple cloth garments that looked almost primitive compared to the environmental suits most travelers wore. The creature, no, the Earth native, was smaller than Lavsar by at least a head, with no visible natural weapons, no armor plating, no signs of cybernetic enhancement, nothing that suggested why the scanner would react this way. "Human?" Lavsar managed to say, his voice weak. He tried to make it sound like small talk, casual, as if his entire understanding of gate security hadn't just been shattered. "Earth native?" The human's mouth curved upward in what Lavsar had learned was called a smile, though he'd never understood why showing one's teeth was considered friendly rather than threatening. "Yeah," the human said simply, crossing his arms over his chest. The gesture was relaxed, almost lazy, but Lavsar noticed how the human's eyes, just 2 of them, how did they manage, never stopped moving, taking in every detail of his surroundings. "Am I free to go?" Lavsar and Tanir exchanged a look across the gate's shimmering surface. Even through the dimensional distortion that bent light into impossible angles, Lavsar could read the panic in his colleague's posture. Then, almost simultaneously, as if connected by the same thought, they both remembered their training. There had been something about unusual readings, hadn't there? Something about additional information buried deep in the manual that nobody ever read? Lavsar's secondary eyes focused on the small symbol in the corner of his scanner's screen, a circle with 3 dots arranged in a triangular pattern that was the Kibtak equivalent of a question mark. He'd seen it before on routine scans, but had never had reason to touch it. With a trembling finger that he had to steady against his other hand, he pressed it. The screen shifted, new text replacing the warning. Lavsar read it once, then twice, then a 3rd time, unable to believe what he was seeing. The instructions were clear. Follow target from safe distance. Observe and document behavior. Do not engage directly. But that wasn't the impressive part. No. What made his stomach turn and his scales itch with primal fear was the text that followed. Exception granted. Watchers may abandon posts to maintain surveillance of Earth native subjects. Abandon their post? In 3 years, Lavsar had never once left his position during a shift. Not when he'd been violently ill from bad rations. Not when his mate had gone into labor with their first clutch of eggs. Never. The very idea went against everything they'd been taught. He looked up at Tarnier again, watching as his partner's fingers fumbled with his own scanner, pressing the same symbol. From the way Tarnier's horns were shifting from blue to a sickly yellow, the color of despair and dread, he knew his partner had read the same thing. "Well?" the human prompted, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I've got places to be. Can I go?" Lavsar's mouth opened and closed several times, but he said nothing. Tarnier seemed to be having the same problem, his jaw working soundlessly. Finally, Lavsar managed to force out the words. You can continue." "I thought so," the human replied, and something in his tone made both guards swallow hard. It wasn't threatening, exactly, but there was a confidence there, a certainty that suggested the human had known all along what their scanners would say. The human walked past Lavsar, close enough that he could smell the alien's strange scent, something primal, completely unlike any species he knew. His footsteps were nearly silent despite the metal platform, each movement controlled. He headed toward the city that sprawled in the distance, a collection of towers and floating platforms. His pace was unhurried, almost leisurely, as if he were out for a pleasant stroll rather than being the subject of the most alarming scanner reading either guard had ever seen. Lavsar and Tarnier stood frozen for another moment, their training and instincts warring with the unprecedented instructions. Then Tarnier rushed across the gate platform to join his partner, his clawed feet scraping against the metal with a sound like knives on stone.
"Should we really?"
Tarnier began, his voice small and vibrating with stress.
"The instructions say to follow, but to abandon our post?" "The scanners have never been wrong,"
Lavsar replied, though his voice lacked conviction.
"In 3 years, it's never given us bad information. But this is different. This is asking us to leave the gate unguarded. What if something comes through while we're gone?"
Lavsar watched the human's retreating form, a strange excitement building in his chest alongside the fear. His hearts, all 4 of them, were beating out of sync, creating an uncomfortable flutter in his chest.
"You know,"
he said slowly,
"I've always wanted to see the city."
Tarnier's horns flashed orange, indignation mixed with disbelief.
"This is hardly the time for tourism." "No, listen,"
Lavsar pressed on, his voice gaining strength.
"We come through these gates every day for our shifts. We see thousands of beings pass through, heading to worlds we'll never visit, cities we'll never explore. We're gatekeepers to the universe, but we never get to see any of it. Just our post, day after day, watching others live their lives while we stand still." "That's our duty,"
Tarnier said, but his tone was weakening, and his horns flickered with purple, curiosity breaking through the fear.
"Our duty is to follow our equipment's instructions,"
Lavsar countered.
"And right now, our equipment is telling us to follow that Earth native."
The human was getting farther away, his form beginning to blend with the crowd of other beings heading toward the city. Soon he'd be impossible to track.
"We need to decide now."
Tarnier's tail lashed anxiously, leaving small scratches on the platform.
"Maybe one of us should stay. Return to headquarters through the gate network. Report this." "And leave one person to follow an Earth native alone when the scanner says, 'Do not engage'? That seems more dangerous than both of us going together."
Lavsar could feel his hearts racing as he made his decision.
"The training says to trust our equipment first. Our equipment is telling us to follow. Are you coming with me, or are you going to stand there like a scared youngling while I go alone?"
The challenge in his words had the desired effect. Tarnir's horns shifted through several colors: yellow fear, orange indignation, purple pride, before settling on a determined green.
Fine,
He said, his voice firm now.
but if this ends badly, I'm blaming you in the report.
Together, they set off after the human. Each step felt monumental, like crossing a threshold they could never uncross. Lavsar couldn't help but glance back at the gate, watching it shrink behind them. In 3 years, he'd never seen it from this angle, never watched it disappear into the distance. The massive circle looked smaller from here, less imposing, almost fragile. Part of him wondered if they were making a terrible mistake. Most of him was certain they were. But they kept walking. The city revealed itself gradually as they approached, each step revealing new wonders and strange sights. Lavsar had seen it from the gate. Everyone could see it from the gate. But being inside it was entirely different. Massive rocks, some the size of buildings, floated at various heights, rotating slowly in defiance of gravity. They were tethered by energy chains that emanated power, the sound creating a constant background harmony. Humble houses were built atop these floating stones, connected by bridges that swayed gently in the wind, their construction a mix of advanced technology and primitive materials. At ground level, the market sprawled, with vendors from a dozen different species hawking their wares in a symphony of alien languages. Lavsar recognized some of the beings they passed, a group of Thrent merchants he'd scanned that morning, a family of Veloki tourists who'd come through yesterday, their feathers ruffling in the alien atmosphere. It was strange seeing them here, in their element, rather than as brief interactions at the gate. They seemed more real somehow, more complete, living their lives rather than just passing through.
There!
Tarnir hissed, pointing with his tail. The human was turning into an alley, disappearing into shadows between two buildings that leaned toward each other like conspirators. The guards quickened their pace, trying to look casual while practically jogging. They reached the alley entrance and peered around the corner. The human stood about 20 meters in, speaking with a figure draped in loose, voluminous robes that obscured any identifying features. The fabric covered its body, making it impossible to determine what species hid beneath.
Don't ask questions,
The robed figure was saying, his voice raspy and mechanical, suggesting either a voice modulator or a species that didn't breathe the same atmosphere.
You pay, I provide. Simple transaction.
I'm not complaining, the human replied, pulling something from his pocket. Even in the dim light, Lavsar could see them clearly. Crystals that glowed with an inner fire, shifting between colors like miniature galaxies. These should cover it. The robed figure examined the crystals with what appeared to be a scanner hidden in his sleeves, then nodded. From beneath his robes, he produced an enormous backpack, which he handed to the human with obvious effort. Whatever was inside was heavy.
Whatever you are planning to kill,
the robed figure said as the human shouldered the pack with surprising ease.
I'll pray for its soul. You need that kind of firepower? Well, let's just say I'm glad I'm not your target.
The human smiled again, that same showing of teeth that Lavsar found so unsettling. Let's hope it doesn't come to killing. Lavsar and Tarnir exchanged panicked looks, their horns blazing blue once more, bright enough to cast shadows in the dim alley. A weapon. The Earth native had just purchased a weapon, something so powerful that even the arms dealer was concerned about its intended use. They stood frozen for too long, paralyzed by the implications. By the time they looked back, the human was already leaving the alley from the far end. They scrambled to follow, nearly knocking over a cart of fruit in their haste. The vendor, a six-eyed Morvac, cursed at them in 3 languages, but they didn't stop to apologize. The human was walking faster now, his stride lengthening as he headed toward another gate, a smaller one, a local portal that connected to other worlds in this corner of the galaxy. 2 guards stood at this gate as well, different species. One appeared to be a Hextari with her 6 arms positioned at various ready positions, the other a bulky Gron with skin like granite and eyes that glowed with inner fire. Just as the guards were beginning their scan, the human stopped and turned around, looking directly at Lavsar and Tarnir despite the crowd between them. "I know I'm being followed," he called out. "These two can vouch for me." He laughed, and the sound sent chills down Lavsar's spine. "Don't engage the Earth native. Isn't that what your scanners said?" The two guards at the new gates looked confused, glancing between the human and the approaching Kibtak. Lavsar and Tarnir had no choice now but to walk forward, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite their mortification at being called out so publicly. The Hextari guard ran her scanner over the human, her 6 hands moving in perfect coordination. Immediately, her coloration shifted. Hextari expressed emotion through their skin like some aquatic species, turning a deep blue-black of alarm. The Grun guard's scanner produced the same result, and he actually took a step back, his massive hand moving to his weapon.
"What does it say?"
Tarnir whispered to the Hextari. She showed him the screen with a trembling hand, in the same angry red as before, but with new text. "Armed Earth native. Run." Without a word, without even gathering their equipment, the two guards abandoned their post entirely, fleeing into the crowd. Their scanners clattered to the ground, still flashing their warnings like distress beacons. The human simply raised his hand in what Larsav would later learn was called a salute, a gesture completely foreign to him at the time, involving a specific positioning of fingers to forehead, and stepped through the portal. The dimensional surface rippled as he passed through, creating concentric waves of energy that took several seconds to settle back to its normal glow. Larsav and Tarnir stood there, staring at the abandoned scanners still blinking their dire warnings, at the empty guard post where 2 professionals had just fled in terror, at the gate that the Earth native had just casually walked through as if dire warnings meant nothing to him.
"We can't,"
Tarnir said, though he didn't specify what exactly they couldn't do. Follow? Give up? Report back? All seemed equally impossible and necessary.
"Those gods ran,"
Lavsar said, still processing what he'd witnessed.
"They just ran, left everything." "The scanner said run,"
Tarnir pointed out, his voice tight with fear.
"Maybe they had the right idea."
Lavsar picked up one of the abandoned scanners, checking its display again. The warning remained, "Armed Earth native. Run." But underneath, in smaller text he hadn't noticed before, "Tracking active. Subject designation, high priority. Observation protocols in effect."
"He's tagged in the system,"
Lavsar said, his mind racing.
"Whatever he's doing, someone wants to know about it." "Someone who isn't us,"
Tarnir said firmly.
"We're gate watchers, not whatever this is." "We've come this far,"
Lavsar argued, though his own conviction was wavering.
"We abandoned our post on the scanner's instructions. We followed him to the city. We saw him buy weapons. If we go back now, what do we report? That we gave up halfway through? That we came to our senses? That we're cowards?"
The word hung between them, harsh but true. Lavsar looked at the gate again.
"One more jump. We see where he goes, what he does. Then we report everything."
Tarnir's horns cycled through colors so quickly they seemed to strobe. Finally, they settled on a resigned gray.
"One more jump. But if that scanner tells us to run again, we run. Agreed?" "Agreed."
They approached the gate together, their bodies tensing involuntarily. Every muscle fiber seemed to resist, an instinctive rejection of what they were about to do. They should be used to this by now. They crossed 2 gates every day just to get to work, but somehow it never became routine. The sensation of space turning liquid around you, of every molecule in your body being dissolved and reconstituted somewhere else, of existing in 2 places at once for an infinitesimal moment. It was fundamentally wrong in a way that no amount of experience could normalize. Lavsar went first, and Tarnir appeared beside him a second later, looking equally disturbed. but their discomfort was immediately overshadowed by their surroundings. The world they'd entered was dying. The very atmosphere felt oppressive, thick with ash and the smell of decay that coated the inside of their nostrils. The sky was a sickly brown, churning with clouds that occasionally lit up with purple lightning that seemed to crawl across the heavens like living things. The air itself felt wrong, heavy with particulates that made breathing difficult. In the distance, they could see what had once been a village. Now it was burning, orange flames consuming whatever remained of the crude structures, sending pillars of black smoke into the already darkened sky. And the human was already walking toward it, his pace still unhurried, the massive backpack making him look like some kind of merchant rather than whatever he actually was.
"What is this place?"
Tarnir whispered, his voice muffled by the thick air. Before Lavsar could respond, they saw them, massive figures moving through the burning village like demons from ancient Kibtak mythology. 4-armed creatures in heavy armor, each standing at least 3 meters tall. Their 4 eyes glowed red in the firelight as they methodically looted the ruins, tossing aside debris and occasionally firing their weapons at anything that moved.
"Trozar,"
Levsar said. He'd heard of them. Everyone had. One of the most aggressive species in the known galaxy, they were notorious for their raids on frontier worlds. The human walked directly toward them, not bothering with stealth or caution. His footsteps crunched on the ash-covered ground, deliberately loud. When he was about 50 meters away, he called out, his voice clear despite the crackling flames. "I'm looking for Akhtar. You'd better not try hiding him, because I know he's here." The reaction was immediate and violent. The Trozar warriors spun toward the human at once, their 4 arms bringing multiple weapons to bear in a synchronized motion. Plasma bolts and projectiles filled the air, a devastating barrage that turned the space where the human had been standing into a molten crater. The sound was deafening, like thunder concentrated into a single point. But the human had already moved, diving behind a massive boulder with speed that seemed impossible for such a seemingly fragile creature. His roll was perfect, ending in a crouch behind cover without a wasted movement. Lavsar and Tarnir pressed themselves against a dead tree, its bark crumbling under their grip, watching in horrified fascination as the human calmly opened his backpack. The weapon he pulled out was unlike anything Lavsar had ever seen. It was sleek, almost elegant, with crystalline focusing arrays along its barrel. The power core was enormous, creating a sound that made Lavsar's scales itch. The human assembled it quickly, each piece clicking into place in a matter of moments. The Trozar were advancing now, firing continuously, their shots turning the boulder into slag. They moved together, trying to flank the boulder from both sides. The human waited, patient as a predator, listening to their footsteps, timing their approach. He adjusted something on the weapon, and the noise it produced increased in pitch. Then he fired. The beam that erupted from the weapon wasn't like normal energy weapons. It didn't just burn or blast. It unmade things at a molecular level. The first Trozar it hit simply ceased to exist from the waist up, his legs toppling forward while his upper body was converted to component atoms that dispersed in the wind. The second tried to dodge, throwing himself sideways, but the human tracked him smoothly, the beam cutting through armor and flesh like they were made of paper. The smell of plasma and something worse filled the air. In less than 10 seconds, 5 Trozar warriors were dead, their remains scattered across the burning village. Only their legs remained, grotesque monuments to the human's firepower, still standing for a moment before toppling over. One Trozar, smaller than the others, with more elaborate armor decorated with kill marks, was already running, using all 4 arms to scramble over debris in his desperation to escape. He moved in hurried steps, abandoning his weapons in his flight. "I've got you in my scope," the human called out, his voice conversational, almost friendly. "If you try to run, I'll melt your limbs, but I won't kill you. Your choice, Akhtar." The Trozar, Akhtar, stopped immediately. His 4 arms rose in an obvious gesture of surrender. The human approached carefully, weapon still raised, pulling something from his pack. a set of four-way restraints specifically designed for Trozar anatomy. He secured Akhtar, then turned to look directly at where Lavsar and Tarnir were hiding. "You guys are still here," he said, and for the first time he sounded genuinely surprised. "How impressive." Time seemed to blur for Lavsar after that. The return journey felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. They retraced their steps through the gates, each transition more disorienting than the last. The human dragged his prisoner, while Lavsar and Tarnir followed at a safe distance. The human didn't acknowledge them again, but he didn't tell them to leave either. When they emerged at their original post, Gate Station 322-B, where this had all started just hours ago, Lavsar felt a wave of relief at seeing the familiar metallic circle, the dimensional shimmer he'd stared at for 3 years. Home, or as close to it as his job allowed. The human paused, looking back at them. Akhtar was silent, his 4 eyes focused on the ground in what might have been shame or fear. "You staying here?" the human asked. "Or do you want to see how this ends?" Lavsar and Tarnir looked at each other. After everything they'd witnessed, the warnings, the weapon, the casual destruction of 5 Trozar warriors, the sensible thing would be to stay, to return to their post, file their report, and pretend none of this had happened. But they'd come this far. Without a word, they followed the human through one more gate. The headquarters of the Gate Network was an impressive place. It was a massive spherical chamber, easily a kilometer in diameter, its walls covered with hundreds of gates, each leading to different worlds, different corners of the galaxy, different possibilities. The gates were arranged in perfect rows, their energy signatures creating a complex harmony that resonated through the space. Bridges and walkways crisscrossed the sphere at various levels, creating a 3-dimensional maze of connections that defied conventional architecture. And it was filled with soldiers. Hundreds of them, from every species Lavsar could name and dozens he couldn't. They all had their weapons drawn, all pointed at the human who stood calmly in the center of it all, still holding Akhtar's restraints. The collective vibrations of charged weapons created a sound like angry wasps. At the front of this army stood a figure Lavsar recognized immediately. Everyone who worked with the gates knew him. President Elix, the white-scaled serpentine who ran the entire gate network. His scaled features were unreadable, but his body language, the coiled tension in his long form, the way his hood flared slightly, suggested something Lavsar would never have expected from such a powerful figure. Fear.
"You cannot keep doing this,"
President Elix said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber, reflected and amplified by the curved walls.
"Earth does not have the authority to kidnap citizens from sovereign worlds."
"Kidnap?" The human's voice was calm, almost amused. "This is an arrest. Akhtar here was part of the team that sent an antimatter bomb through Earth's gate. I know you are old. You remember that, don't you? 16 million dead? And our gate destroyed, cutting us off from the network." Lavsar and Tarnir exchanged shocked glances. They'd heard those old rumors about Earth. Everyone had. But the details had always been vague, classified above their clearance level. President Elix's tail lashed in agitation, creating sharp cracking sounds against the metal floor.
"And Earth has had its revenge. When your primitive minds learned gate mathematics out of pure spite, when you hacked our network to introduce mosquitoes to the Trozar homeworld, do you know how many died? The entire ecosystem collapsed. Billions human, billions dead because of a tiny insect. Isn't that punishment enough?"
"That wasn't Earth's official response," the human said patiently, as if explaining something to a child. "That was one angry kid who'd lost his family. He didn't understand the consequences. Earth's government didn't sanction it, didn't want it. We want justice."
"Justice!"
Elix practically spat the word, venom dripping from his fangs.
"You've hunted down every single Trozar who was involved in the attack. Akhtar is the last one."
"Exactly." The human's grip on the restraints tightened, his knuckles whitening. The last one. Let me take him through to Earth for trial, and this ends. No more unauthorized gate jumps. No more hunting. Earth will finally be willing to negotiate, to rejoin the network officially instead of just hacking our way in. The tension in the chamber was suffocating. Hundreds of fingers, claws, and appendages rested on triggers. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and the entire space would erupt in violence that would paint the walls with blood and energy discharge. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Even the ambient noise of the gates seemed to quiet, as if the universe itself had frozen. Finally, President Lick spoke.
This is the last one. The absolutely last unauthorized transport. If Earth wants anything else, they go through proper channels.
Hacking gates doesn't require authorization, the human said with that teeth-showing smile. But yes, this is the last extraction. He walked toward one of the gates, dragging Akhtar behind him. The soldiers parted reluctantly, their weapons still raised, but no longer aimed directly at him. At the threshold of the gate, one that presumably led to Earth, the human paused and looked back. "Thanks for the escort," he said to Lavsar and Tarnir. "Most would have run." Then he was gone, vanishing through the gate with his prisoner, leaving two very confused Kibtak guards standing in the middle of the most powerful military force in the galaxy. President Lick slithered over to them, his massive form towering over the two guards. Up close, Lavsar could see the intricate patterns of his scales, each one containing what looked like a tiny galaxy.
You followed the Earth native all the way here?
Lavsar found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a squeak.
The scanner said to follow and observe. We were just following orders.
To his surprise, Lix laughed, a sound like wind through dry leaves.
You followed an Earth native through multiple gates, witnessed him eliminate a Trozar raid party, and still had the courage to continue. That's either very brave or very stupid. We're not sure which ourselves,
Tarnir admitted, his horns cycling through embarrassed purples and oranges. Ylik studied them for a moment, his serpentine eyes unblinking.
The scanners flag Earth natives because they're dangerous, yes, but also because we need to know what they're doing. They've been hacking our gates for 10 years now, going wherever they please, and we can't stop them. Their understanding of gate mathematics has surpassed ours somehow. The best we can do is watch, document, and hope they eventually decide to play by the rules. So we did the right thing?
Lavsar asked hopefully.
You did exactly what you were supposed to do, which is why I'm promoting you both.
Ylik gestured with his tail toward one of the larger gates, one surrounded by more elaborate decorations and guards in ceremonial armor.
That's the gate to the Galactic Council. The beings who pass through there are the most important in the galaxy. Ambassadors, presidents, generals. It's also customary for them to tip the gate watchers quite generously.
Lavsar and Tarnir stared at each other, their horns shifting through a rainbow of colors. Surprise, delight, disbelief.
You're giving us the council gate?
Tarnir asked, his voice cracking.
You've proven you can handle unusual situations without panicking,
Ylik said.
Well, without panicking too much. The council gate sees plenty of those. Plus,
and here his voice took on an amused tone,
after word spreads that you two tracked an Earth native across 3 worlds and lived to tell about it, you'll have quite the reputation. That could be useful.
As Lick slithered away and the soldiers began to disperse, returning to their posts throughout the massive sphere, Lavsar felt a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep in his chest. This morning, he'd been a simple gate watcher, content with his boring, safe job, standing in the same spot he'd stood for 3 years. Now, he was being assigned to the most prestigious post in the network, all because he'd followed his scanner's strange instructions and hadn't run when every instinct told him to.
We should have run,
Tarnier said, but his horns were bright gold, joy, pure and simple, the color so vivid it seemed to glow.
Probably,
Lavsar agreed, his own horns matching his partner's golden hue.
But then we'd still be standing at that old gate, scanning travelers and wondering what was out there.
They made their way to their new post, walking across one of the sweeping bridges that connected the gates. The Galactic Council gateway stood waiting, its frame inscribed with the seals of 1,000 worlds, each one representing a civilization that had earned a voice in the galaxy's governance. The honor guards stationed there nodded respectfully as they approached. News traveled fast in the headquarters, and everyone already knew about the 2 Kibtak who had followed an Earth native and lived. As they took their positions, scanners in hand, Lavsar thought about the human's words. Thanks for the escort. Most would have run. Most would have, but they hadn't. And sometimes that made all the difference.